Jesus commanded them not to tell anyone, but the more he did so, the more they kept on talking about it. People were overwhelmed with amazement. He has done everything well, they said. He even makes the deaf hear and the mute speak. I just thought, as we begin our meeting tonight, it was just worth just thinking about that miracle that Jesus did, because I think it helps us to think through the issues that we're talking about tonight and we're going to be thinking about tonight. Here we see Jesus performing a miracle, and of course throughout the Gospels we see Jesus performing lots of miracles. But actually I think what's particularly interesting here is not so much the miracle Jesus performs, but the way he does it. And in the way he does it reveals his character and his love and his kindness for this man. So people bring this guy to Jesus who's deaf and mute, so he can't talk, he can't speak. Sorry, he can't talk, he can't hear. And of course, Jesus could have healed him there and then, couldn't he? He could have just said, right, open your ears, open your mouth and be able to speak. But Jesus doesn't do that. I think there's a very clear reason for that. Think for a moment how that would have affected this man. He's never heard before, as far as we can tell, and suddenly he'd be able to hear in the middle of this crowd. How overwhelming would that be for someone if you've never heard and suddenly you can hear everything in this large, bustling crowd? And he's never spoken, but suddenly everyone would want to hear him speak, wouldn't they? It could kind of turn into a bit of a spectacle, as it does later on in verses 36 to 37. And so it could have been incredibly hard for this guy, even though Jesus performing this miracle would have been wonderful. Actually, if Jesus had just treated him like a problem to be solved, then actually it could have been incredibly difficult for this guy. And so Jesus actually does something different. He takes him away, in verse 3, away from the crowd, we're told. So now they're on their own, or at least they're in a quieter place. And then Jesus sort of uses seeming sign language to talk to this guy. So Jesus puts his fingers into the man's ears, he spits and he touches the man's tongue. I think he's essentially kind of saying to the guy, whatever it is that's stopping you from being able to speak, I'm going to get rid of it. And then he, even in the word he uses, ephphatha, it seems like a word which is very easy to lip read. So everything Jesus is doing here is seeming to make it easier for this man to understand what's going on. So you see, as Jesus approaches this man with this problem, he doesn't just see him as a problem that needs to be fixed. He sees him as a person who needs to be welcomed and a person who needs care and compassion. And therefore, I think that really does fit with what we're thinking about tonight as we're thinking about particularly people with autism, but also people with just additional needs as well. People can struggle with these same difficulties that this guy did, can't he? Loud noises can make people overwhelmed. Being around lots of people is really hard for some people. Being expected to make conversation is really difficult for some. And that can make life in a busy, bustling church really difficult. So I think just before we go any further, it's just worth recognizing, isn't it, that, well, Jesus recognized that, and he cared and showed compassion for someone who had these struggles. And Jesus shows us how we're to treat people who have these kinds of struggles. Not just to ignore their struggles and not just to expect them to get on with it and to fit in, but to accommodate them, to work with them, to help them, and to show compassion. And that's what we're doing here tonight at East Street. As a church, we're trying to think through these issues, how we can include autistic people and people with additional needs into the life of the church. We recognise that autism particularly does cause barriers and to people being able to worship with us and sort of enjoy every aspect of church life. So we want to recognise that, and we want to make people feel welcome. Now, this is only the start of a conversation for us here at East Street. We're not expecting to come out tonight with sort of lots of plans necessarily, but we do want to start thinking about this as a church. And obviously there are people from other churches here as well, and people from other churches joining us online. So we hope you'll sort of join us in this as we sort of think through these issues. But to start this conversation, to start thinking about this as a church, we've invited Mark Arnold, who comes from Urban Saints. He's a specialist in this area, particularly working with children and young people, but hopefully he'll have a little to say as well about, you know, autism across the board of the ages. And so I'm going to hand over to Mark in a moment, and Mark's just going to speak to us for a little while, and then there'll be a time for questions at the end. But thank you, Mark, for coming, and thank you all for coming to East Street. And I'm going to hand over to Mark now.
Brilliant. Thanks, mate, and good evening. Lovely to see you all. Great to be here with you all this evening, and hello to those that are joining online as well. Great to have you connecting in as well. As Tim's introduced, my name's Mark. I work for Urban Saints, look after our additional needs work there. Wear various hats. One of the hats that I'm proudest to wear is I'm dad to James. James is the young lad in the picture there. He's not that age anymore. That was about 10 years ago. He's a big, strapping, nearly 22-year-old now. But James is autistic, has learning difficulties, epilepsy, anxiety, and a whole bunch of things that he's journeying with. And it's very much an inspiration and a reason why I'm involved in the work that I'm doing. So it's great to be here with you. You've got a couple of books that are there with you. You don't necessarily need to be using those tonight, but they're yours to take away. One is that what we're looking at this evening is part of a broader training session. And so the workbook with the picture of James on the front is the workbook that goes with that training session. But I also got asked to do this little Grove booklet called How to Include Autistic Children and Young People in Church. And I thought you might like a copy of that as well. So there's a copy of each of those for you to have a look at. During the course of the evening, there'll be occasions where I'll pass things around for you to have a look at. There's a couple of occasions where I'll give you 2 or 3 minutes to have a chat with somebody next to you to just put into your own context the things that we've been looking at. So hopefully you're sat next to somebody that you like. Now is that awkward moment where somebody stands up and moves. but I'm going to start off handing things around by handing around my mood octopus. Has anybody come across a mood octopus before? Yeah, you come across a mood octopus. This mood octopus is a great little tool, a simple tool that can help a child or young person. Tim mentioned I'm from Urban Saints, we're children's and youth workers, so that's the end of the age range that we focus on. Much of what we'll talk about tonight is adaptable to all ages, but I'm going to be focusing more on the sort of children, youth and young people's age of things. But for somebody who struggles to be able to communicate how they're feeling, Mood Octopus can be a really simple tool to help them with that. Mood Octopus at the moment is smiling, which is great, but if I turn Mood Octopus inside out, it's got a sad and grumpy face. Really simple, isn't it? But really effective. So I'm going to put Mood Octopus back to smiling again. Are you good at catching? Brilliant. Pass Mood Octopus round and have a look at that. There'll be other bits and pieces coming round too. Another thing that I think it's really important for us to do this evening is to hear from autistic children, young people and young adults themselves. Really key that we hear their voice. And so I've got 3 short little video clips that will be peppered through the evening that give us just a little insight from autistic people themselves about their journey, the things that they found hard. And in this first one, a little 60-second video, you're going to hear from Kieran and his mum Lynette. Kieran's a young adult, and they share just a bit of their journey. And there's a really important challenge that Kieran gives us at the end, which I hope will stay in our hearts and minds as we go through the rest of the evening together. So here's Lynette and her son Kieran.
As a mum, inclusion for me is really important. I mean, if we look at the Bible, Jesus included everybody. you know, and quite often it was the ones that were on the edges of society. So it would be the women, the children, the disabled and the sick.
My name's Kieran. That's kind of as far as I'd ever go. Someone with Asperger's syndrome is someone on the autistic spectrum who they might still struggle socially or emotionally with their day-to-day life and just need that extra support.
Outside of church, my son has been ignored a lot when he was at school. He would be the last person that would be included with anything or to be asked to parties or anything. Those invitations rarely came.
We're just like anyone else. We want to be a part of everything that's going on. Let us.
Really powerful challenge there at the end from Kieran, isn't it? We're just like anyone else. We want to be a part of everything that's going on. Let us. So let that be a challenge for us that we journey with through the rest of the evening together. Now, we're all sensory creatures. We often have a need to fiddle and fidget with things. Maybe you're a doodler. Maybe you click a pen. Maybe, a bit like me, you can sometimes chew your glasses. I'm a menace for doing that. I've got a friend of mine who crochets in church, and that's her fidget activity. There might be different things that you do. I've brought my fidget box with me, so I'm going to entrust that to Tim to distribute, for you to borrow something from the fidget box to have a fidget with as we go through the evening. Children, young people, young adults even, with various additional needs, including autistic children, young people and young adults, will fit into that category of, like all of us, being sensory creatures and finding something helpful to fidget with and fiddle with. So have a go at the stuff that's in the box. I think it might have just arrived with the kids at the back and may go no further. but that's absolutely fine for a little while. That's absolutely perfect. So hopefully when it comes round, you can find something that will help you to focus and concentrate as we go through this next sort of hour together. Okay, so we're going to start off by just getting a little bit of an understanding of what autism is and what autism isn't. We're going to cover the things that are up here on the screen. How common is it? What's neurodiversity? Identity first or person first? How do we refer to autistic people? What's that medical model versus social model? Well, we'll find out in just a few moments. We'll talk about brain overloads. We might know a little bit about meltdowns, but shutdowns might be something that you've not come across so much. And then there are loads of autism myths. We'll perhaps touch on one or two of those as well. So how common is autism? Well, I've been talking about autism for probably about 12 years now. And when I started talking about autism, I was using figures that the National Autistic Society were using, which suggested that about 1 in 100 people in the UK are autistic. Some people still use those figures around about today. But over that 12 years, we've seen a shift in that figure. We've seen different research and studies done. I know a few years after that, I was talking about 1 in 86. Then I started talking about 1 in 58. The Department for Health in Northern Ireland did some work just in the last year across schools in Northern Ireland. And the results of that suggested that as many as 1 in 22 children and young people are autistic. Now, that's quite a big shift, isn't it? From 1 in 100 to 1 in 22. Some of the more rabid red-top newspapers started talking about an autism epidemic and all kinds of alarmist sort of reporting. Are there 4 to 5 times as many autistic children, young people, young adults now than there were 12 years ago? No. Are we better at understanding autism, diagnosing autism, being aware of autistic children, young people and adults? Yes, we're much better at that. And one big shift that we've seen in the public consciousness during that time is that girls are autistic too. It's not that long ago that in the public perception, autism was just a boy thing. boys were autistic, but it wasn't something that girls were. Of course, we know that girls are autistic too. It can present itself in different ways. It can be a different journey for girls than it is for boys, but there are similarities too. Girls are often better at masking their differences. They're better at mimicking their, mimicking their peers. And so it can be harder to spot, or has been in the past, harder to spot, which is one explanation for that big shift in numbers. Will that number keep changing? I think it will. I don't think we're there yet. I think we've still got more that we can do to understand autism better, be better at spotting autism in children and young people and young adults too. So it's a big area, and that means that, in most churches there are likely to be autistic children, young people, and indeed adults. One thing that we're spotting at the moment, a trend that we're spotting at the moment, is where more children and young people are being diagnosed and their parents are taking them to those appointments and taking them through those diagnosis processes. We're seeing more mums and dads that are getting a late diagnosis themselves, because as they sort of tick the boxes with their child, they're thinking, I'm ticking those boxes too. And especially mums that slipped through the net as girls and weren't picked up then, are now getting a diagnosis and a better understanding about themselves now than when they were younger. So, yeah, lots of shifts that we're seeing there. Neurodiversity, that's a big word. What does that mean? Neurodiversity is a different way of the brain being wired. So it covers a wide range of different areas. Autism is one of them. ADHD is another. Dyslexia, dyspraxia, OCD. There are a whole bunch of different areas that are all part of this neurodiversity mix. And it's a different way of the brain being wired. So if you imagine that computer systems, many of us got computers at home or at work that we use. The majority of us will have a computer system that runs Microsoft Windows and all the applications that go with that. Some of us will have a computer system that runs the Apple Mac operating system and applications. They are doing the same thing, but in a different way. And it's a little bit like that with neurodiversity. It's journeying in a different way, experiencing the world differently, communicating differently, understanding things differently. If you think about it in terms of a computer system, Windows versus Mac, then that's a helpful way of understanding it. What it isn't is a behavioural thing. So often people, when they think about autism, think about behaviour, think about, an autistic child who might be described as naughty. Sometimes parents are labelled as bad parents because their child's autistic. All of that is untrue. It's a different way of the brain being wired. Now, because autistic people might communicate in different ways, journey through life in different ways, understand the world in different ways, what that means is that they'll come up against all kinds of barriers, and we'll look at some of those barriers in a bit. Barriers that the world and society puts in their way and makes the world a harder place for them to experience. And because of that, sometimes that can be frustrating, that can be difficult, that can lead to them struggling more. But it's not that they're being badly behaved, it's that they're responding to the environment that all of us create in society. But we'll come on to that in just a moment when we talk about the medical model and the social model. Identity first or person first. So there are different ways of talking about autistic people. We can talk about autistic people, we can talk about people with autism or people that have autism. But what do autistic people themselves prefer? Because it's surely best that we go with what they would prefer to be identified as themselves. And time again, when autistic people are asked, then the answer that they give us is to use that identity-first language, to be referred to as autistic people. So when we're talking about children and young people, we talk about autistic children and young people. We talk about autistic people generally. And so in the broadest sense, it's that identity-first language that we use. However, and it's a big important however, individually, people can identify however they like. Kieran, in the video earlier on, referred to himself as having Asperger's syndrome. Now, we don't tend to use that term so much now. There are all sorts of difficult connotations with Asperger. So we just generally talk about autism. But Kieran's absolutely entitled to identify as having Asperger's syndrome if that's what he prefers. So generally, we talk about autistic people individually, whatever their preference is. And we ask them to help us with that. Medical model and the social model. Well, these models get used in lots of different ways. And in the context of autistic people, then the medical model talks about autism as a disorder, doesn't it? Autism spectrum disorder or autism spectrum condition. Now, if you are diagnosed with a disorder or a condition, then generally that's something that the medical world will try and heal you of, isn't it? That they'll try and make you not have that disorder or condition anymore. And that's a difficult road for us to go down as a society, because most autistic people are quite happy being autistic and they'd rather remain that way and quite enjoy the difference and diversity that brings. So the idea of having to not be autistic isn't something that's welcomed by many autistic people themselves. So those terms in the medical world, like disorder and condition, can be hard for us. And of course, in a church context, there's an extra layer of difficulty that gets added there as well when we talk about things like healing. And sadly, there are many occasions where an autistic child is brought out to the front of church and prayed over for them to be released of their autism. And when that doesn't happen, sometimes their family are blamed for not having enough faith and all these sorts of things. And it all stems from that medical model. The social model, however, is a much better way for us to think about this. Because the social model says, actually, the world is largely created by and driven by neurotypical people, non-autistic people, and Windows operating system brained people who don't really always think about their autistic counterparts. And so barriers are created, and we'll explore some of those in a bit, which make the world a harder place for autistic people. If, as a society, we recognise and celebrate the diversity of the people that are in our community, then we're much more up for making the world a better place for everyone. And then the responsibility for that is all of us, isn't it? It's all of our responsibility to make what we do, whether that's in church or in society generally, a better place for everyone. And so the social model is much better at helping us to think about that. It puts the emphasis on all of us rather than on the individual, the autistic person, to somehow be healed or have their autism removed. Brain overloads, meltdowns and shutdowns. Sometimes there can be too much going on for an autistic person. Too much sensory overload, too many people to talk to, too many other sensory things going on. They might be struggling because they've not eaten or not slept well or a bit poorly or all kinds of other things, even before they perhaps come to church. And then they get to church and it's an echoey room and there's lots of people and there's bright lights and flickery fluorescent tubes and all kinds of things that can just add to that sensory overload. And sometimes for any autistic person, particularly for a child or young person who's still trying to figure all this out as they go through life, it can result in them becoming brain overwhelmed and overloaded. And that can then present itself sometimes as a meltdown, or what we might refer to as a meltdown. And that meltdown, if you've ever seen an autistic child or young person having a meltdown, is a loss of control. they're not able to do anything about what's happening. But they might, in the case of a meltdown, they might shout out, they might flail their arms and legs around, their mind will be racing. There can be, quite a sort of dramatic element to that meltdown. It's out of control for that child or young person. Nothing they can do about it. But there's plenty we can do to help and support them. We can get alongside them and check that they're okay. And create a bit of space around them so that they don't hit something with their arms or legs. We might even think about, can we turn down some of the noise or lower the lighting a bit, or just create a calmer environment so that maybe they can get through that physical part of the meltdown a little bit quicker. But the most important thing is not to see it as bad behaviour, because it's not. It's a complete overwhelming of the brain. It's just as serious as any other medical emergency that a child or young person might have. After a meltdown has finished, or at least the physical aspect of it, it's still going to take sometimes several hours for that child or young person to fully recover. It's a big deal, and it needs a little bit of calm time for them to be able to work through that. So what's a shutdown? Well, a shutdown is when a child or young person does shut down, maybe stops talking, stops moving, becomes really sort of unresponsive to people communicating with them. It's just as debilitating for them as a meltdown. It's just not as dramatic. Their mind won't be racing so much as in a meltdown, but their mind will be ruminating on all the things that have created that shutdown for them, the same sorts of things that might create a meltdown as well. Now, very broad generalization disclaimer here before I say this next bit, but generally speaking, boys are more disposed towards meltdowns, girls are more disposed towards shutdowns. Now, of course, boys can have shutdowns too, girls can have meltdowns too, but boys are more disposed towards having meltdowns, girls more disposed to having shutdowns, which is why often girls have slipped through the net, because a quiet girl that sat still and not responding to much is easily overlooked, isn't she? And that can be why in the past girls were overlooked. So look out for shutdowns, because that's just as important, and the recovery time can be just as significant for a young person that's having a shutdown. And then autism myths. There's a whole bunch of them in your Blue Grove Youth book, I think on about page 6, somewhere around there. And there's plenty more, I'm sure, that we can think of. We had quite a few years ago now the myth about how autism is caused by vaccination. It was the MMR jab a few years ago. Those of us that are old enough to remember that saga, completely debunked. But it came back again in more recent times when people are saying, the COVID jab is causing autism. Again, completely unproved and a myth, but nevertheless is out there. One myth which is more dangerous really than that, because it really affects families and can put them back on their journey with their autistic child or young person, is the myth that they'll grow out of it. It's okay, they'll grow out of it. Which often well-meaning people will say to families that might just be struggling with all of this and trying to figure it all out. And of course, an autistic child or young person becomes an autistic adult. That neurodiversity doesn't change when they hit their 18th birthday. But what can happen is that if we say to families, they'll grow out of it, then families will start to perhaps think, okay, well, we don't need to do anything then. We'll just leave things for a bit because they'll grow out of it. Whereas actually the earlier that therapies and support and diagnosis is put in place, often the better the outcome can be for the future of that child or young person. So there are lots of myths, and there's a few of them in the book there to have a look at. So I'm not going to go through lots of them, but you might know a few autism myths as well. I'm going to tell you a quick story, though. The story's about Martin. And for Martin's story, you need to come with me, if you will, in your imagination to my home church down in Bournemouth. It's a beautiful July summer's evening. It's been a lovely hot sunny day. It's a beautiful warm summer's evening, and it's our club night for our 9 to 13-year-olds. And I'm on the entrance of our church hall greeting the young people as they arrive and saying hello to some of the families that are dropping them off. And a lad and his mum arrive and come up the pathway towards me. I've never seen before. And as they arrive with me, I can really sense that there's a powerful story that's coming with them. And when they arrive with me, Martin, as he's introduced, and his mum start asking me about what we do in the club and all the things that you share with the new family. And then I can sense there's something else that Martin's mum wants to say. And suddenly out it comes, and she says, only Martin's autistic and he's got ADHD. ADHD is attention deficit hyperactivity disorder. Another of those disorders. You must try and get away from using those words. But Martin's autistic and got ADHD, and we've tried to get him into other groups and into other clubs, and they've always said no. And then she shared the stories with me of a church that said they didn't have enough volunteers and therefore couldn't take Martin on. I've yet to meet, in 12 years of talking about this, a church that's got more than enough volunteers in their children's and youth team. None of us have. But that was the reason given. Another group said they had volunteers, but they weren't trained in how to support children and young people with additional needs. And they didn't seem to be looking for that training either. Another group said that they wouldn't be able to include Martin because they were worried he might be a health and safety risk to the other children and young people and leaders. Heartbreaking, isn't it? And my heart was breaking. 90% of my time was absolutely wrapped up in what Martin and his mum were sharing with me. And if you're wondering what the other 10% was doing, well, that was being horribly distracted by the absolute carnage that was going on in the room behind me. In blood-curdling screams, young people climbing the walls. I wondered where the rest of the team were that were supposed to be doing some stuff with them. Talk about not having enough team. As one particular scream erupted from behind me, which convinced me that surely somebody must have just died from the volume and ferocity of it. And I looked behind me to see what was going on. Thankfully, they were fine. But Martin's mum took the opportunity in that moment to ask me the question. She said, would Martin be able to come here? And I heard the tremble in her voice, and that broke my heart again. But as I was looking behind me, I could see several other young people that we've been journeying with who are autistic or have ADHD or other additional needs, sometimes several. And I really sensed God whispering in my ear and saying, there's room for one more, There's room for one more. And I looked back at Martin and his mum, and the thing that struck me about Martin's mum was the look in her face. It was blank. She was waiting for another no, another excuse, another reason why Martin wouldn't be able to go. And my heart broke yet again. And I found myself saying, we would love Martin to be a part of our group. And as those words escaped from my mouth, the loudest scream I have ever heard in my life erupted from behind me. I was sure that somebody must have died this time. And I looked behind me, and it gave me the opportunity, as I did so, to say to Martin and his mum, and as you can see, he'll fit right in. And she laughed, and the light came back into her eyes. The weight lifted from her shoulders. Stuff matters, doesn't it? This stuff matters. It's important. It really is. Saying yes is so important. So, have 2 or 3 minutes, very quickly, just to chat about what we've looked at so far. How does that influence the things you're doing at church, or maybe just generally about church life? What's that look like in your context? The social model as applied to autism. How does that change your thinking from thinking about autism as a condition or a disorder? Who can help us on that journey to support those autistic children, young people and adults that we're journeying with? And are there any other myths that you've heard and come across? So quick 2 minutes to have a quick chat, and then we'll crack on to some more bits and pieces that I'm hoping to share with you this evening. 1 more minute. Quick chat. 1 more minute. Okay, draw your conversations to a close and we'll crack on with some more input, some more things to share. We've got lots to pack in and I want to make sure that we've got some time at the end for any questions that you've got as well. It's possible that the next slide's a video. Is the next slide a video? Yeah, it is. I thought it was. Yeah. This next slide is a video that is from the National Autistic Society. And it's actually of a mum and her lad going into a shopping mall. And you see the lad getting more and more overwhelmed as he goes through the shopping mall. And then there's some interesting things to look at right at the end. But there are similarities between a shopping mall and church. Big open space, lots of echoes, bright lights, smells, people, lots of similarities there. So when you're watching this, watch it as it is, but also think about it in the context of church as well.
Take my hand.
No, Alex. It's fine, isn't it?
I'm not naughty. I'm autistic. And I just get too much information.
He's not naughty, he's autistic, and he gets too much information. All that stuff that was happening was just building up and all coming in at the same time. And it became overwhelming for him. And that gives us a little snapshot into church too, doesn't it? There's lots of similarities between a shopping mall and a church hall. So it's easy to see how those barriers can be there for autistic children, young people and adults in church as well. Did you notice the woman at the end that walked by, and sort of sneered at the lad? I call them the meerkats. There are meerkats and lions, and there are meerkats and lions in many churches too. And so, if a child or young person's struggling, little forest of heads will shoot up and swivel around like meerkats and stare and tut and comment. And it's unkind. And I have a dream that one day all churches will have on their front doors a picture of a meerkat with a red line through it, a meerkat-free zone. But there are lions in churches too. I'm sure we're all lions here tonight. Lions they protect each other, don't they? They work as a pride. They care for each other. And the lions will get around a child or young person or adult who's struggling and ask them what they need and how to help them. And maybe have a word with one or two of the meerkats as well. And let them perhaps just think differently about what's happening. There are all sorts of barriers that we experience in our churches, physical, program and people. Physical barriers will be some of those that we saw in the video, loud noise, echoing noise, lots of people, bright lights, all kinds of things that can be difficult. Strange smells. Sometimes the coffee machine can be a challenge for some people. The strong smells like that. But sometimes lots of clutter. Too much to look at. And it's really hard to be able to avoid looking at loads of stuff. So there are lots of barriers around the places that we meet as church. And those can be quite difficult environments for many people. I mentioned fluorescent tubes earlier on. I'm not having a go at your lighting, but fluorescent tubes are often identified by autistic people as being particularly difficult. They are bright. They flicker, but also they buzz. And you may not hear that buzz, but an autistic person could. And that buzz can become overwhelming. All kinds of things that you may not expect to be an issue can be. I heard the story of an autistic boy who, until he was about 8, didn't have much verbal communication. So he wasn't able to explain why sometimes at home, in the kitchen dining area, he'd go screaming from the room or would hurl himself on the floor and wrap his arms around his head. And it was only as his speech developed that he was able to let them know that it was the fridge. The fridge motor, when it would switch on, would be like somebody putting a drill to his head. It was incredibly difficult for him. And so when they realised this, they got some ear defenders for him to use. I'll pass some ear defenders around so that you can have a play with those. They're kids' ones, but they do extend out a bit, so you may be able to fit them on. And that made a huge difference. So lots of physical barriers. There are program barriers as well. The things that we run as church. So unpredictability can be a challenge. So not knowing what's happening now, what's coming next, changes to the program. So you think it's going to be one thing, but then it turns into something else. Unexpectedly, so one thing that can be a horror, particularly for children and young people, is in many of our churches, I know we've done this in my home church, when a child or young person has been for so many Sundays, they might get an award. They might be given a Bible or a book token or whatever it might be. And what can be really difficult is if unexpectedly a child is asked to come out to the front to receive their award and they're not prepared for that. That can be difficult too. But there are also things around the place which, even signs that we put up, all kinds of things. There's a wonderful story of a church warden had been going around putting signs up during the week, all laminated and in Comic Sans typeface everywhere. And that coming Sunday, as the children and young people were heading out to their session, and they had to go out through the main entrance to the worship area, an autistic lad saw a sign that was next to a big bank of light switches. And the sign said, "When leaving the room, please turn off all the lights." Well, he was leaving the room. So he followed the instruction and switched off all the lights and plunged his congregation into darkness. Maybe if it had said, "If you're the last person leaving the room, turn off all the lights." So thinking through things like that. And then people barriers. People barriers. There can be all sorts of people barriers. Every church has a hugger, doesn't it? And they're lovely people, and it's a wonderful service for some people, that really appreciate a hug. But for autistic people generally, and children and young people as part of that, often that is not welcomed. It's not helpful. That physical contact is hard. There can be a sensory sensitivity to touch. All of that can be quite difficult. Plus, somebody they don't know. So there are all sorts of reasons why hugging can be hard. Eye contact can be difficult. Sometimes eye contact can be difficult because to give somebody eye contact takes up all their focus. And so they can't then hear what you're saying. So if somebody is looking past you when you're talking to them, it might be that they're doing that so they can hear you. So don't assume they're being rude. It could be that they are just making sure they can listen to you by sort of looking blankly at something on the wall, that then allows them to hear what you're saying. So there are all sorts of people barriers, expectations to sit still and not move, and all those sorts of things that can be hard for an autistic child or young person. But as we can see in the picture, some simple understanding of that and reorganising of our expectations can mean everybody can join in together. And so if we understand what we're doing there, then that can really help us. One way we can do that, and one of the things that I'll send to Tim, could you pass some of those around just to give people examples to have a look at, is a site checklist. So we can have a bit of a check around those physical, program and people barriers and see how we're doing. And get a feel for what things we can change, what simple, easy wins we can put in place to make what we do a better place for everyone. There are all sorts of things on there. It's something that at Urban Saints we put together with our friends at Youthscape. One of them at the top there is ableist language. What's ableist language? Well, ableist language is saying, okay, everybody, let's stand to worship. And of course, for a lot of people of any age with a disability or different additional needs, that may not be possible. Or they may be able to get up on their feet for a few minutes, but then that's them completely wrecked for the rest of the day. Please stand to worship is one of my favourite bugbears. I think that whenever we're together as God's people, we're worshipping anyway. And so my favourite phrase is, we're going to sing now. Please stand, stay seated, or dance in the aisles, whichever you prefer, because God really doesn't mind. And so, the ableist language can be an issue, but there's loads more on the checklist to have a look at as well. Asking, making sure we ask the children, young people and adults that we're journeying with. Ask splits down into those 3 parts, A, S and K, contacting them and asking them for their views. What barriers have they experienced in church? Seek, what solutions can they think of? Are there ideas that have been helpful for them in other settings? In school, at home, in other clubs, other places that they go. What strategies are there that are in place there that we can borrow from and put into practice in church? And know, autistic people or the families of autistic children and young people know their themselves or their children best. They know what works for them. They know what barriers those children and young people experience. They know because when they get home from church and their child is absolutely exhausted from being sort of bombarded with sensory input at church, they'll talk about it and they'll know what those things are that we can put in place to make a difference. Let them be our guide. Let's make sure we do inclusion with people and not unto them. Often we end up doing inclusion unto people. We decide on their behalf. A bit like the story that Tim shared of the man who was deaf and didn't speak. It would have been really easy for that to have been done unto him in front of that crowd. But Jesus gave him dignity and respect and took him to a quiet place. And so the first thing that the man heard was the voice of Jesus. Better. Yeah, better. There are good ways to do things. Oh, and we're going to have a video, which I better introduce. So you're going to meet a bunch of American school kids. Now, why am I going to show you a video of a bunch of American school kids? Well, because they're going to share ways in which they would like their teacher to know more about them. And as you see this, you'll recognize what they say in the children, young people, maybe adults that you journey with as well. So let's have a listen to them. The final group of people who are neurodiverse that we're going to hear from this evening.
Dear teacher, I know it doesn't always seem like it, but I really do want to listen and learn.
It's just my brain is kind of different. So this is what I'd like you to know about me. I have to move, or I really can't pay attention.
Even though I'm not looking at you, I can still listen to what you're saying.
If you tell me Sit up straight. Now I have to use all of my brain to do just that.
It makes me feel sad when you tell me to try harder, even though I've already tried as hard as I can.
I actually listen better when I'm rocking in my chair.
When you give me a bunch of directions, I start to think I will never remember all of this.
Sometimes my mom or dad ends up doing all of my homework. So here's how you could maybe help.
Let me get up and move while I'm learning.
Let me look wherever I want when you talk to me.
Let me rock or slouch in my chair.
No matter what, please don't take away my recess. Give me help I could do all by myself. Make directions very short.
Just ask me, what does your brain need right now?
And one more thing. My brain might be different than yours, but it's still amazing.
Sincerely, your student.
Your student.
Your student.
Your student.
Great kids, aren't they? Yeah, did you recognize them in perhaps children, young people, or even young adults that you know? Somebody that needs to get up and move while they're learning, somebody who rocks in their chair, somebody who needs stuff made into bite-sized chunks just for them, somebody who can't always give you eye contact but's listening to what you're saying. And so many others. I'm going to send Tim an email with a whole bunch of different bits and pieces to share with you sometime over the next couple of days. And there's a link that I'll share. I think actually the link's in, it might be in your workbooks. No, but I'll send the link, which is a video playlist of a whole bunch of videos that are connected with this topic we're looking at. And all the videos that I've shown tonight are in there. So you'll be able to have a look at them again, share them with others in your team if you would like to. Now, I'm going to very quickly, in the next sort of 10 minutes, less than 10 minutes, just cover off a few practical things that we can all do. There's a whole bunch of stuff that I'm going to talk through, but thankfully, many of them come from a talk that I did at a conference recently called 10 Things in 10 Minutes. So we've got time. So it'll be all good. And the first of these, and Tim, I'm afraid you're going to be my runaround, but these are one-page profiles. It's a great tool that helps us. I don't know quite why we can't see Rebecca's, but you can see the other one, and you can get them from the Chef Kids website, and they ask 3 things. What do people like and admire about me? What makes me happy? And how I want to be supported. Those are 3 pretty important things for us to know, aren't they? I recommend using these with particularly children and young people that you're journeying with, or with all of them. You'll find out more about them. But it's a great way of getting to hear their voice, particularly that how I want to be supported bit. It's a bit like those kids in the video just then were sharing with us. It's a great tool. You can get them for free from the Chef Kids website, chefkids.co.uk. I'll send some examples in the email that I'll send over the next couple of days, so you can have a look at those as well. Timeout breaks or sensory safe space. Sometimes a child or young person, or indeed an adult, can struggle during a service or a session that we're running. But a bit of a quiet space where they can just go and be and regulate their senses and just be able to then rejoin after a few minutes of doing that can be a really helpful thing to offer. This is a space that I've run at a few festival events over the years, and sometimes there's more stuff going on in here. There's all sorts of sensory things for people to play with and explore that's calming and really helpful. There are ear defenders. There's a dark den that somebody can climb into and shut everything out for a little bit. But having a little gazebo up at the back with a few fidgets and some bean bags and some ear defenders could be a really helpful starting point for somebody that just needs to be able to, just share a little bit about how they're doing. You can even use and have available some things like these Stickman cards. So they're coming round next. The Stickman cards are flip cards. So the first one says that I'm fine, I'm okay with this. The next one says I'm struggling to cope. The third one is, I'm really not coping. It's a great tool that we can use to equip people to be able to share with us how they're feeling. And if they're struggling, then a sensory calm or sensory safe space can really help. Sensory activity breaks. If you're going to be doing something that a bunch of people need to think about or listen to somebody talking, something that's a little bit more thinking and doing in that way, give them a little bit of a stretch break first. Give them the opportunity to have a little walk around the room or to do some stretches, or give them something they can squeeze, like some Theraputty or Play-Doh or something that's physical that they can do, because that helps us then to be able to focus and concentrate for a bit when we're doing that thinking or listening time afterwards. So sensory activity breaks are a useful addition. More time to complete tasks. I've left my sand timer in the car. I thought I brought everything in, but I left the sand timer in the car. Otherwise, I'd have had my sand timer here and I could have shown that to you, but there's plenty up there, different durations. If you're doing a particular sequence of events, then signpost the end of the current event by giving everybody a 5-minute warning. Use a sand timer or an on-screen counter or something like that that helps people to know that there's 5 minutes left and then they're going to move on to the next thing. Gives a bit more processing time. Processing time is really important for autistic people. It's helpful for them to know that there's 5 minutes left, and a visual representation of that can be really useful as well. Sand timer or an on-screen timer can really help, just to let them know, okay, we've now got 3 minutes left, we've now got 2 minutes left, we're soon going to be moving on to the next thing. That can also be helpful if the thing that we're now going to be moving on to is something that they really, really like and enjoy. That can then be, okay, they've only got another couple of minutes to wait for that. I've got some of these to hand around. Yeah, there we go. Only about 3 of those, but what's coming around now is just an example of a daily routine. Now, this is one for kids, for small children. But you can adapt the idea for older children, young people, and even extend it up to think about what could that look like for adults. Just step-by-step instructions. Each stage has a tick box. So there's a particular thing they do first, then they can tick a box. Then do the next thing, tick a box. Then do the next thing, tick a box. And that ticking of the box helps them to then know that they've completed that task and are moving on to the next one. As I say, this is just an example. It's a kid's example. But the idea, the concept of step-by-step instructions and a tick box can work really well. Social stories, that's coming round next. There's a bunch of those. And social stories using text and images and some symbols to create information that helps a child or young person or adult to know what's happening and to prepare for that. So the social story that's coming around is about going to Joy Club at church. And so in coming to Joy Club, they get to see the place where they meet, know what they're going to do, know who goes there and what they're like, some of the activities that they'll be taking part with, and what happens at the end of Joy Club. It's a terrific tool that can help a child, young person or adult to prepare for that particular activity that they're going to be coming to, if it's the first time that they've come to it. So rather than turning up and not knowing what to expect, they can have processing time and preparation time that helps them to understand it before they get there, and in a way that's accessible and inclusive. So social stories can help with that. Visual timetables. Here's a visual timetable that we've used in the past with my lad James. There's his picture of him on there. starts off with us going to church, and as we go from one activity to the next, so James is able to take his picture and move it all the way down. Sometimes we'd get to church and he'd take his picture and move it all the way down to snack time. He likes snack time, and we'd have to let him know that snack time's later and circle time's first. And he'd sort of mournfully accept that because he'd realise that snack time would still come and that's going to happen. So a few samples of that visual timetable just for people to have a look at coming round as well. Clicker. Oh. Can we... Yeah. Oh, inclusion champions. Yeah, last one. So inclusion champions are the most significant change that any church can make. And this is across all ages, although often it starts with children's and youth work. Having somebody that owns this, somebody whose role is to make sure that everybody is included. A go-to person for families or for people with additional needs and disabilities themselves, and a link between them and folk that do the AV desk, or people that lead worship, or people that preach and teach, or people that run our children's and youth work. Having an inclusion champion is transforming. I know churches that I've spoken to where they had 2 children who had additional needs that they wanted to support better. They put an inclusion champion in place to support those 2 children better. Within 2 years, those 2 had grown to 22, an 11-fold increase, because they were putting things in place. If there isn't anybody championing it, then it risks sort of slipping down the priority list again, doesn't it? So having a champion for this is the most significant thing, other than asking people. That's the most important thing. But alongside that, having somebody champion this is the most significant thing that a church can do. I think I got through the 10 things in 10 minutes. We've got about 10 minutes left. I think what I'm going to do is give you 2 of those minutes. If I just move on to the next slide. 2 of those minutes just to have a chat about physical barriers that you can identify, program barriers that you might think of that might get in the way of an autistic person, people barriers. You know, what others can you think of in addition to those we looked at? And you know, whose job is it to break those barriers down? Well, I'll answer that one for us. It's all of our job, isn't it? But maybe we could have an inclusion champion in the mix there too. A whole bunch of stuff that I've given you just in that section since you last had a chat. So 2 minutes to have a quick chat about all of that, and then we'll have a few minutes left for any questions that anybody's got. Deal? Brilliant. Okay, go for it. One more minute. One more minute. Okay, let's draw ourselves back together again. Hopefully that was a helpful few minutes just to land a few of the things that we've been talking about there. But we've got a few minutes left, 5 minutes or so left, for any questions that anybody's got. We've covered a whole bunch of stuff. Has this been helpful for you this evening? Brilliant. That's good to hear. That's good to hear. Any questions that anybody's got? Maybe about something we've covered this evening, or maybe something else that you would love to ask about around this area. So, yeah, go for it, Tim.
I'm just sort of thinking through the question of the club situation that you kind of brought up. And I think it's, really wonderful that obviously this family that have been turned away from Zara
Yeah.
welcome you. On a practical level, though, in a club setting, which is incredibly noisy, and then sort of we have kids running around playing games, and then there's this moment where they've just got to sort of settle down, listen to a talk or whatever it might be. And particularly where you've got kids who are, say, like non-verbal or things like that. Yeah. Are there any particular strategies you would have in that kind of a situation?
Yeah, no, that's a really good question. So yeah, thinking about a typical club night, how do we transition from lots of noisy activity to a quieter time when we're going to be perhaps just talking a bit about God or something like that? What we might typically call the God slot, often. So I think figuring out when that happens is really important, because often, I'm not saying it happens here, but often a typical club night is lots of frantic activities and games and things. Then we shove loads of sugary sweets and fizzy pop down them. And then we say, right, now sit down and be quiet and listen whilst we do our talk. And we wonder why that doesn't go so well. But successful models for this split the talk and other aspects into the evening. So there might be an activity that then flows into a 5 is becoming overwhelmed, or they're just not engaging with the content. And so, one thing we could do is find out what they really enjoy doing. A one-page profile will help with that. Often if a child or young person is engaged in something they're really enjoying, they're not going to be wanting to throttle the young person next to them, because they're really interested in doing this Lego that they've got and that sort of thing. So I think the starting point would be to wind it back to there. Clearly, as in any children's and youth work, you risk assess the environment and the things that you're doing and the activities that you've got. And if you see that there's a gap there, then you look at how to fill that. Now, if there's a child or young person, whether they have additional needs or not, who can sometimes be aggressive to another child, and that doesn't have to be a child with additional needs, that could be anybody, then exploring what happens in other environments that child's in. So because it's unlikely that they would be behaving like that in isolation in just one setting. They're likely to perhaps be behaving like that at school or in other areas. So understanding what strategies are in place in those other environments to support them and help them when they're getting to that point will give us some tips that we can use in church as well. So understanding what they like doing so that we hopefully avoid them getting in that situation in the first place, but then understanding how to support them if that does happen by learning from what happens in other settings for that child or young person too. Well, yeah, I mean, you should get that information in advance. That's that's something you work through in advance. If you are in that situation, then the priority is to keep that child and other children as safe as it's possible to be. Now, that might involve having to sort of get everybody else away. That might involve contacting the family of the child or young person who's massively struggling and asking them what to do and how they respond in that situation and learning from them. But hopefully that's a conversation you'd have before you get to that point and not in the crisis itself. Yeah. Yes. Yeah. Oh, yeah. So, so the checklist, the way that phrase is in there probably isn't helpful. What I'm meaning by that is ideally not having parents as one-to-ones for their child. And there's a couple of really good reasons why I suggest that that's a strategy to avoid and to have other people, if we can recruit other people to one-to-one and buddying roles. Firstly, it broadens the range of adults that child or young person encounters and trusts and builds a relationship with, and that can be a good and healthy thing. But it also means that the family members that might come with that child to church are then released to be spiritually fed themselves in church, possibly to serve in church as well. So for us, there was a little team that looked after James. Each time we were there on a Sunday, Ian or Alison or Rich would be there to look after James. And that meant that my daughter Phoebe was able to be in the worship band. My wife Claire could help to run our children's group. I'm able to teach and preach and do youth work. So we're all able to serve our church community because there's a little team that look after James. If one of us was out there each week with James, then that would mean we wouldn't be able to do those other things. And it would also mean we wouldn't be getting spiritually fed in church. Now, there's a bigger question that raises around getting those one-to-ones as a team. I've stood up in front of my congregation at church and said, we need some more people to join our wonderful children's team. And I've seen most of the congregation switch off at that point because they don't see themselves as children's workers. This is a pastoral care kind of role. It's not an actual sort of children's worker kind of leading games and songs and activities kind of role. It's getting alongside a child or young person and supporting them and understanding them and helping them and listening to them. So it's more of a pastoral care kind of role. And a great way to recruit for that is if you're running a holiday club or a Easter party or a light party or a Christmas party or events like that. It's much easier to encourage people to come and volunteer to help out and support some folk on a one-off event like that. But once they've had a go and they've quite enjoyed it, then they're much more open to maybe being part of that little team that could then be available for one-to-one support a bit later on. So hopefully that helps. I think we've run out of time now, so I'm going to hand back. But thanks again for having me here tonight and cheering you on. And I'll send all these things that I've been passing around to find their way to you as well.
Cheers, Mark. Yeah, absolutely. Massive thanks to Mark. Really helpful. A lot of food for thought. I'm thinking sort of about Sundays, the way we do Sundays, but also the clubs and stuff like that. Are there just some simple things we can do to make things just a bit easier for people? But as I said at the beginning, that's a conversation we can kind of continue having. But this has been really, really helpful. So thank you so much, Mark. if you want, Mark's going to send me a load of stuff on email, as he said. I'm conscious I don't have everyone's email address here. So what I'll do is I'll grab a piece of paper, put it on the table by the door. If you want that stuff that Mark's going to share, if you just put your email address on there, and I'll get it to you as soon as I get it, all right? Let's just pray, shall we, to end. Our God and Father, Lord, we thank you for all that we've heard tonight, and Lord, that the challenge that there's been, but Lord, also the really helpful advice there's been. Lord, we pray, give us wisdom, give us grace, give us a heart like Jesus, which is full of compassion, and which is ready to step out and actually, go out of our comfort zone to make someone else feel comfortable. Lord, to welcome those maybe, Lord, who in wider society, Lord, are sometimes shunned, are sometimes just considered too hard work and aren't welcome. Lord, we pray